Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be exploring something pretty fascinating. We're going to dive deep into the world of organizational cognitive neuroscience.
Or OCN, for short.
OCN,
Yes,
exactly.
That's right.
It's really all about how our brains work in the context of organizations. Think workplaces, businesses, even volunteer groups. Really the whole human element of, how things get done.
The human side of things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's about time we bring the brain into the boardroom.
Yeah. I like that. So to guide our deep dive today, we have a really great editorial. It's from the journal Frontiers in Human Neuroscience, and it's called Society, Organizations, and the Brain, Building Toward a Unified Cognitive Neuroscience Perspective.
Catchy title.
It is, right.
Yeah.
Sound a little academic, but trust me, it gets really interesting.
I believe it.
So what jumped out at you when you first read this editorial?
What's really interesting is it starts by acknowledging this tension, this fundamental tension in organizations. That they're designed for efficiency, profit, clear goals, all that. But the people running these organizations, well, we're messy. We're emotional beings. We don't always make those perfectly rational decisions.
Definitely not them.
So it's this real contrast.
It's like trying to fit, a square peg in a round hole sometimes.
Exactly. And that's where OCN comes in. It's saying, hey, instead of ignoring the human brain, let's really try to understand it. Let's use what we know about neuroscience, not against them.
I love that. It's not just about psychology anymore. It's really about the wiring of our brain, the actual physical brain.
Exactly. OCN, it integrates knowledge from all these different fields. Evolutionary biology, social psychology, cognitive science, you name it, all to try and paint this complete picture of really how we behave at work.
So it's really taking a much more holistic approach.
It is, very much so.
And it's not just about sticking people in fMRI machines either, right?
No, definitely not. While brain imaging can be a part of it,
right.
OCN is much broader than that.
Yeah.
It uses multiple levels of analysis to really try to understand how our brains influence our behavior in organizations.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How did this whole field even come about?
Well, researchers and practitioners alike, they started realizing that traditional organizational studies weren't really fully capturing the complexity of human behavior. They were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, the brain.
But they're trying to solve a mystery without, looking at the key piece of evidence.
Precisely. And so OCN aims to fill that gap by providing a more comprehensive framework to understand how our brains influence everything from decision-making to leadership to team dynamics, you name it.
So really kind of giving us that missing piece of the puzzle. So let's talk about some of the specific insights that OCN has uncovered.
Okay, well, one area that caught my eye was the research on media usage and its impact on mental health.
Oh, this is relevant to pretty much everyone these days, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Emails, social media, Zoom calls, it never ends.
The constant barrage of information.
It is. It's like a fire hose.
Exactly. Well, the editorial cites a study by Block and colleagues from 2014, and they found a link between heavy media usage and self-reported depression.
Oh, wow. I guess that's not surprising, but it is kind of scary when you think about it,
Yeah, it is a bit concerning.
Are we all slowly frying our brains?
Well, I wouldn't say frying our brains, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And what's fascinating is that this research points to the need for what we might call brain breaks.
Oh, interesting.
Periods of time where we disconnect from the digital world, give our brains a chance to rest and recharge.
Yeah, I like that. So maybe companies should start encouraging digital detox periods or something throughout the day.
That's a great application of this research. Instead of seeing breaks as lost productivity, organizations could actually reframe them as essential for maintaining employee well-being and focus.
Right. It's about working smarter, not harder.
Absolutely.
I love that idea. Now, another area that I found really fascinating was the research on leadership in the brain.
Yes, this is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
The editorial highlights a study by Boyatzis and his team, and they actually used fMRI to look at the brain activity of leaders.
Wait, so they put leaders in those big brain scanners, and what they found is that different leadership styles actually engage different neural networks in the brain.
Oh, wow.
So it really suggests that our brains might be wired for different approaches to leadership.
So it's almost like there's a switch in the brain that leaders can flip depending on the situation.
That's a good way to think about it. And the research suggests that the really effective leaders are the ones who can flexibly activate these different systems, depending on what's called for.
So sometimes you need to be more like supportive
Yeah.
and understanding, and other times you really need to take charge and be more directive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like having different tools
Right,
in
yeah.
your leadership toolbox and knowing which one to use at the right time.
Right, exactly. And this research, it has some really practical implications, I think, for leadership training and development.
Right, absolutely. We can actually train leaders to be more aware of their own, their neural tendencies and really develop the ability to switch between those styles more effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting implication of this research because it means that leadership isn't just some innate quality.
Right, you're not just born with it. You can actually develop it.
It's a skill that can be developed and refined by understanding how our brains work.
I have to ask about two fields that always kind of grab my attention. They're neuroeconomics and neuromarketing.
Those are definitely buzzwords these days.
They sound both fascinating and a little bit creepy, to be honest.
I can see that.
Like, can they really read our minds and manipulate us into buying things we don't need?
That's a common concern. And I think it's really important to approach these fields with a healthy dose of skepticism, but it's not about mind control. Neuroeconomics and neuromarketing are really about understanding how our brains respond to things like prices and advertising and financial decisions.
So it's about getting a deeper understanding of the subconscious factors that influence our choices.
Exactly. And this knowledge can be applied in many ways, both ethically and unethically. For example, imagine being able to design marketing campaigns that are not only effective, but also resonate with people's genuine needs and values.
That would be amazing. Yeah, instead of just trying to trick people into buying things,
Right.
You're actually creating marketing that adds value to their lives. But of course, it's important to use this knowledge responsibly, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
We need to be aware of that potential for manipulation and make sure that those insights are really used to benefit both consumers and businesses.
I completely agree. Now, another interesting point that the editorial brings up is the importance of understanding those different theoretical layers.
Oh, yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion
Exactly.
to understand the complexity of human behavior.
Right. And the editorial provides a really helpful framework for thinking about these layers. It starts with the most basic level, which is the individual's brain and its biological mechanisms.
So things like neurotransmitters and hormones and brain regions.
Right, exactly. Then it moves outward to the social layer, the interactions between individuals within a team or organization.
So how we communicate and collaborate and build relationships with our colleagues.
And finally, it expands to the organizational layer, the culture, the values, the policies, the structures that shape the overall work environment.
So it's like this Russian nesting doll of influences, each layer kind of containing and shaping the ones within it. But how does this layering approach actually help us in practice? Can you give me a concrete example?
Of course, let's say a company is struggling with low employee morale. Using the OCN framework, we wouldn't just assume that employees are lazy or ungrateful. We would start by looking at that individual layer. Are employees feeling overwhelmed by their workloads? Are they getting enough sleep and exercise? Are their basic needs for autonomy and competence being met?
So we're not just jumping to conclusions or blaming individuals. We're really taking a step back and considering all those underlying factors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we'd move to the social layer. Are teams functioning effectively? Are there conflicts or communication breakdown? Is there a lack of trust or support among colleagues?
So it's about looking at the dynamics between people.
It is.
And how those relationships might be impacting morale.
Exactly. And finally, we'd examine the organizational layer.
Right.
Does the company culture value employee well-being?
Okay.
Are there policies in place to support work-life balance?
Right.
Does the leadership style promote collaboration and open communication?
It's about recognizing that the organization itself might be inadvertently creating
Yes.
an environment that's demotivating for employees.
Absolutely.
By considering all these layers,
Yeah.
the individual, the social, and the organizational,
Right.
we get this much more nuanced and holistic understanding of the problem.
Exactly. And that allows us to develop more targeted and effective solutions.
Right. So instead of just throwing a pizza party or a one-time bonus.
We can actually address those root causes of low morale and create lasting change.
It's about moving beyond those superficial fixes and tackling those underlying issues
Yeah.
that are impacting people's well-being and performance.
Absolutely. Okay, so it sounds like OCN offers this really valuable toolkit for building better organizations.
It does. What are some of the practical benefits that organizations can reap from applying OCN principles?
Well, for starters, OCN can really help us design workplaces that are more conducive to focus, productivity, and well-being.
I think we could all use a bit more of that these days between, all the burnout and the stress.
It's a lot.
So how can we actually use OCN to create healthier workplaces?
Well, if we know that our brains are wired for social interaction, for instance, we can create office spaces that encourage collaboration and communication instead of isolating people in tiny cubicles all day long.
Right, so no more cubicles. It's all about open plan offices now.
Well, that's where the nuance comes in. It's not about one-size-fits-all solutions. OCN helps us understand that different people have different needs and preferences. So, an ideal workspace would actually offer a variety of environments. Some designed for collaboration, some for quiet focus, and even some for socializing and taking breaks.
Okay, so we need options that work with our individual brain wiring.
Exactly.
What else can we do?
Well, OCN can also inform the development of more effective leadership training programs.
Like the different neural systems involved in leadership, the whole flipping the switch idea.
Yeah, so we can use that knowledge to help leaders become more adaptable and effective. We can train them to be more aware of their own brain tendencies and develop the ability to switch between those leadership styles more effectively.
So instead of just telling leaders what to do, we can really help them understand the why behind effective leadership. It's about giving them the tools and the understanding to actually make it happen.
I think that's a great way to put it. And this kind of training can really lead to more engaged employees, better decision-making, and ultimately a more successful organization.
It's a win-win for everyone.
It is. And OCN can also help us improve employee well-being.
Which is a major concern. Huge these days. I mean, between burnout, stress, this always-on work culture,
Right.
It feels like everyone's struggling. So how can we apply OCN to, actually address these issues?
Well, by understanding how factors like workload, stress, social support, and even the physical work environment affect the brain, organizations can take concrete steps to create a more supportive and healthy workplace.
Like what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, think flexible work arrangements, mindfulness programs,
Okay.
opportunities for social connection, even just ergonomic workstations,
Right.
designed to reduce physical strain.
So it's really this holistic approach to well-being, taking care of both our minds and our bodies. And OCN is kind of like that scientific foundation that explains why these initiatives are so important.
Yeah, it's not just about being nice to employees. It's about really understanding that their well-being is directly linked to their productivity, creativity, and overall success.
So it's really a win-win.
Yep.
Starting to see OCN not just as this scientific field, but as like a powerful toolkit for building these better, more human-centered organizations.
That's a great way to put it. It's really about using science to create workplaces that are not only more effective, but also more fulfilling and humane for everyone involved.
Before we move on, I'm kind of curious, are there any areas of modern work that you think might be particularly mismatched with how our brains naturally work?
And that actually leads us perfectly into our next point. This editorial touches on something called the evolutionary mismatch hypothesis.
Oh, that sounds intriguing. Like our Stone Age brains trying to navigate a Silicon Valley world?
Exactly.
Ah.
The idea is that our brains evolve to thrive in environments that are vastly different from the modern workplace.
Right.
So, for example, think about our ancestors. They were constantly moving, interacting with nature, facing unpredictable challenges.
Yeah, it was all about hunting and gathering
Right.
and avoiding saber-toothed tigers
Exact.
and, I guess, collaborating with their tribe.
Absolutely, yeah. Their survival depended on being highly attuned to their surroundings, collaborating with their tribe, and making quick decisions in the face of danger.
So basically the opposite of sitting at a desk staring at a screen all day.
In many ways, yes.
Wow.
And this mismatch between our evolved brain and our modern work environment might actually be contributing to some of the issues that we see today, like stress, burnout, and difficulty focusing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We're basically forcing our brains to operate in a way that they weren't designed for.
Precisely. And this isn't to say that we should all go back to living in caves, but it does highlight the importance of designing workplaces that are more aligned with our natural tendencies.
So more movement, more social interaction,
Right.
more opportunities to, engage our problem-solving skills.
Exactly. Think standing desks, walking meetings, collaborative workspaces, and tasks that challenge us intellectually.
It's about creating environments that really stimulate our brains and allow us to tap into those innate abilities. So instead of feeling drained and depleted at the end of the day,
Right.
we should be feeling energized and engaged.
That's the goal. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the potential of OCN to really transform leadership development.
We've already touched on the research about different leadership styles
Right.
and how they engage those different brain networks. But what are some practical ways that organizations can use these insights to develop more effective leaders?
Well, one exciting area is the development of neurofeedback training programs. It's a technique that allows individuals to monitor their own brain activity in real time and learn to regulate it.
So it's like giving people a window into their own brain and the power to control their neural patterns. That's amazing.
And studies have shown that neurofeedback training can be really effective in enhancing leadership skills,
Oh, wow.
like emotional regulation, focus, and decision-making.
So imagine a leader who's prone to getting flustered under pressure. With neurofeedback training, they could actually learn to calm their brain down and stay focused in those stressful situations.
Exactly. And this kind of training can be especially valuable for leaders who are facing increasing demands and complexities in the modern workplace.
It's like giving them a superpower.
It is. It
The
is.
ability to control their own brains and optimize their performance.
It's pretty cool. What other applications of OCM in leadership development are you curious about?
Well, I think another area that could be really interesting is using virtual reality simulations for leadership training.
VR for leadership training. Tell me more.
So imagine a leader who needs to improve their conflict resolution skills. We can create this virtual reality environment where they can practice having difficult conversations with virtual employees, receiving feedback on their approach, refining their communication strategies.
It's like a flight simulator for leadership.
It is.
Yeah.
It's allowing people to practice their skills and build confidence
Right.
without the risk of those real-world consequences.
Exactly. And the beauty of VR is that we can create these highly realistic and immersive scenarios that are tailored to the specific challenges that leaders are facing.
This all sounds incredibly promising, but I'm also wondering, are there any potential downsides or ethical considerations we need to be mindful of when applying OCN to leadership development?
That's a crucial question, and it's one we need to address head on. I think one concern is the potential for coercion or manipulation.
Right, like using brain data to pressure employees into conforming to certain leadership styles or behaviors. That sounds pretty dystopian.
It's definitely a slippery slope. We need to be very careful about how we use this knowledge and ensure that it's always applied ethically and with respect for individual autonomy.
So transparency and informed consent are key.
Absolutely. Employees should always be fully informed about how their brain data is being used, and they should have the right to opt out.
Right, it's about empowering employees,
It is.
not controlling them.
And another ethical consideration is the potential for bias.
Oh, can you elaborate on that?
Sure, if we're using brain data to identify potential leaders
Right.
or assess leadership potential, we need to be very aware of the potential for algorithms or interpretations to be influenced by pre-existing biases.
So, for example, if an algorithm is trained on data from predominantly male leaders, it might inadvertently favor characteristics
Exactly.
that are stereotypically associated with masculinity, even if those characteristics aren't actually essential for effective leadership.
That's a great example. And this bias could perpetuate existing inequality and prevent qualified individuals from diverse backgrounds from reaching their full leadership potential. Exactly.
Yeah, so it's really crucial to be aware of these potential biases and to constantly evaluate and refine our methods
Absolutely.
to make sure that we're not inadvertently discriminating against anyone.
I completely agree. Ethical considerations should always be at the forefront of any application of OCN, especially in leadership development.
It's about using this knowledge responsibly. Now, shifting our focus back to the individual employee. OCN offers some valuable insights into how we can optimize our own brain function and enhance our performance at work.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm all about self-improvement, so I'm definitely interested in hearing more about this. What are some practical takeaways from OCN that our listeners can apply to their own work lives?
One key insight is the importance of understanding our own chronotypes. Your chronotype refers to your natural sleep-wake cycle, whether you're an early bird, a night owl, or somewhere in between.
I'm a total night owl. I do my best work late at night when everyone else is asleep.
And that's perfectly fine. The problem is that many workplaces are structured around a traditional 9-to-5 schedule that doesn't take individual chronotypes into account.
So forcing night owls to wake up early and be productive in the morning is basically fighting against their natural biology.
And this can lead to decreased productivity, increased stress, and even health problems over time.
So what can we do about it? Should everyone just work whenever they feel like it?
Well, that might not be practical for every organization, but there are definitely ways to accommodate different chronotypes. For example, companies could offer flexible work schedules, allow employees to work from home during their peak productivity hours, or even design office spaces with different lighting and temperature settings.
Oh, interesting.
To cater to those different sleep-wake cycles.
We need to be more flexible and adaptable to allow individuals to work in ways that align with their natural rhythms.
Another practical takeaway from OCN is the importance of mindfulness and stress reduction techniques. So instead of just powering through our workday fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, we should be taking breaks to meditate, do some deep breathing, go for a walk in nature.
Yeah, even just a few minutes of mindfulness practice throughout the day can make a big difference in our overall well-being and productivity.
This is great advice. I'm definitely going to try incorporating more mindfulness into my own work routine.
Well, another key insight from OCN is the importance of novelty and challenge.
So instead of just sticking to our routine tasks, we should be seeking out opportunities to learn new skills, take on challenging projects, step outside our comfort zones.
Exactly. And this doesn't have to be anything drastic.
It could be as simple as learning a new software program, volunteering for a different role on a project, or even just taking a class in a subject that interests you.
So it's about keeping our brains engaged and active, preventing them from getting stuck in a rut.
Exactly. And the more we challenge our brains, the more adaptable and resilient they become.
Right, which is essential these days.
It is, especially in today's rapidly changing work environment.
So embrace change, seek out new experiences, and never stop learning. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on a topic that I think is particularly relevant to our listeners.
Sure.
Decision-making.
Ah, yes.
Decisions.
Decisions. We make them all day long, both big and small.
We do. But how can OCN help us make better decisions, especially in the workplace?
That's what we're here to find out.
Because I feel like I'm constantly bombarded with information and choices. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get overwhelmed and make these impulsive or irrational decisions.
You're not alone. The modern workplace is a whirlwind of information overload and competing priorities. But OCN offers some valuable insights to how our brains make decisions and how we can improve our decision-making processes. Well, one key insight is that our brains are wired for both intuitive and deliberative decision-making.
Okay, what's the difference?
So intuitive decision-making is fast, automatic, and based on our gut feelings and past experiences. It's what we use when we make split-second decisions or when we're dealing with familiar situations.
Like when I hit the snooze button on my alarm clock every morning.
Exactly. Deliberative decision-making, on the other hand, is slower, more analytical, and involves consciously weighing the pros and cons of different options. It's what we use when we're making important decisions with long-term consequences.
Right, like when I'm deciding whether to accept a new job offer or invest in a new venture.
Exactly. And the key is to know when to rely on intuition and when to engage in more deliberative decision-making.
So how do we do that? How can we tell when we should trust our gut and when we need to slow down and analyze?
That's where OCN can help. By understanding the neural processes involved in both intuitive and deliberative decision-making, we can develop strategies for making better choices in different situations.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're a manager who needs to make a quick decision about a staffing issue. If you're dealing with a familiar situation that you've encountered many times before, it might be perfectly fine to rely on your intuition. But if you're facing a novel or complex problem, it's probably best to take some time to gather information, weigh the options, and engage in more deliberative decision-making.
So it's about being aware of our own decision-making tendencies
Exactly.
and adjusting our approach based on the situation.
Precisely. And OCN can also provide insights into how to overcome common decision-making biases. Well, one common bias is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that.
Oh, you all are.
Especially when it comes to politics or social issues.
Well, it's a natural human tendency. But in the workplace, confirmation bias can lead to poor decisions if we're not careful.
Right. So how can we overcome this bias?
Well, OCN suggests strategies like actively seeking out diverse perspective, challenging our own assumptions, and being open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence.
So it's about being more objective.
It is,
Yeah.
and less emotionally invested in our own opinions.
Right, which can be really tough sometimes.
It can be, especially for leaders who are often under pressure to make quick and decisive choices. Understanding the neural underpinning of these decision-making biases, we can develop strategies for mitigating their impact and making more rational and informed choices.
This is also fascinating.
It is.
I'm starting to see how OCN can truly revolutionize the way we work and lead.
I think it has that potential.
Are there specific techniques from OCN that can help people make better decisions, especially under pressure?
That's a great question. One technique that comes to mind is something called cognitive reappraisal.
Can you break it down for us?
Sure. Cognitive reappraisal is basically about changing how we think about a situation to change our emotional response to it. So, for example, imagine you're a leader facing a challenging project with a tight deadline. You might start feeling stressed and overwhelmed. But with cognitive reappraisal, you can try to reframe the situation. Instead of viewing it as a threat, you can try to see it as a challenge, an opportunity to learn and grow.
So it's like turning that negative self-talk into something more positive and empowering.
Precisely. And studies have shown that cognitive reappraisal can actually reduce stress hormones and improve decision-making under pressure.
That's amazing. So next time I'm feeling the pressure, I'll try to remember, challenge, not a threat. Opportunity, not a disaster.
That's a great mantra.
Okay, what other techniques are there?
Another technique that can be helpful is something called perspective taking.
Okay, does that mean putting myself in someone else's shoes?
Exactly. So when we face a difficult decision, it's easy to get stuck in our own heads.
Right.
In our own limited perspective. But by taking the time to consider other people's viewpoints, we can gain a broader understanding of the situation.
Okay.
And make more informed decisions.
So if I'm a manager, let's say, and I'm trying to decide whether to promote someone, I should try to gather feedback from multiple sources, not just my own observations.
That's a great example. So by talking to the employees, colleagues, clients, and even their direct reports, you can get a more well-rounded view of their strengths and weaknesses and make a more objective decision.
So it's about getting out of our own echo chambers, exposing ourselves to those different perspectives. This all ties in nicely with what we talked about earlier, about reducing those decision-making biases.
Exactly.
By consciously practicing cognitive reappraisal and perspective taking, we can train our brains to make more rational decisions, more informed decisions.
Absolutely.
I'm already feeling more empowered to tackle those tough choices.
I'm glad to hear it.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the future of OCN. This field is still in its early stages, but where do you see it going in the next few years?
That's an exciting question.
Yeah.
I think we're only just scratching the surface of what OCN can tell us about human behavior and organizations. One area that I'm particularly excited about is the development of more personalized and tailored interventions.
Personalized interventions, what does that mean?
Well, right now, a lot of organizational interventions are one size fits all. But we know that everyone's brain is different. What works for one person might not work for another.
So instead of those generic leadership training programs, we'll have programs that are specifically designed for individuals.
Right, based on their unique brain profile.
Wow.
So imagine being able to create leadership development plans that are tailored to an individual's strengths and weaknesses, their cognitive style, and even their chronotype.
That would be amazing.
It would.
It's like having a personal trainer for your brain. What other advancements are you excited about?
Well, another area that holds great promise is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning.
How would AI be used responsibly in the context of OCN?
That's a crucial question, and it's all about ethical implementation
Okay.
and transparency. So AI can be a really powerful tool for identifying patterns in brain data that we might not be able to see on our own. For example, imagine being able to predict which employees are at risk of burnout or which teams are likely to experience communication breakdowns.
So AI could act as like an early warning system.
Exactly, allowing us to intervene before those problems escalate.
But it's important to remember that AI should never be used to replace human judgment or to make decisions that impact people's lives without their knowledge or consent.
It's about using AI as a tool to augment our understanding.
Not to replace our humanity.
I like that. Okay, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I do have one final thought, and it's this. This knowledge is empowering. It gives us the ability to create workplaces that are not only more effective, but also more humane. We can design organizations that support well-being, foster creativity, and nurture human potential.
That's a beautiful vision. So instead of seeing work as a place where we have to, suppress our natural instincts and conform to these rigid structures, we can create environments where we can actually thrive, both individually and collectively.
Exactly, and I think that's something worth striving for.
I couldn't agree more. Well, listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of organizational cognitive neuroscience. We've covered a lot of ground today.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. How can you use the insights from OCN to make a positive impact in your own work life? And the organizations that you're a part of, whether you're a leader, a manager, or an individual contributor, you have the power to make a difference.
You do.
So go forth, embrace the power of your brain, and let's create a future of work that is both productive and profoundly human.
That's the goal.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.